go. Sammy Drip Drip's back. Are you ready for this? In honour of Soldier Boy, here we go. Soldier Boy up in the hole, whammy cranky whammy roll, whammy crank that Soldier Boy, that bitch get RKO'd. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Figure Fourcast. My name is Sammy Drip Drip, and as ever, I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Damien Cross. How are you, Damien?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a fun week. Say with quotes there. Obviously, I had to do the punishment video. But we released the episode for the podcast, which I hope everyone has listened to. It was a lot of fun to record. We was a bit sillier than perhaps we normally are. We had a bit more jokiness to it. Let's hope we can carry on. And obviously, the intro there is a perfect example of that. But yeah, it's been a good week. Interesting, definitely interesting.
It has been an interesting week. Damien started off the week with becoming silky smooth and having silky smooth legs from his waxing punishment. And the wrestling has been just as wacky as well, from Randy Orton having a clone to Shaquille O'Neal having a wrestling match and everything in between. So it's going to be interesting discussing it this week.
Well, before we get on to the actual wrestling shows this week, as you've mentioned it in the intro, I feel like now is the best time to discuss it. We have had possibly the weirdest wrestling story in a while of a Twitter feud between Randy Orton and Soldier Boy, which was not something I expected to see on Twitter when I Tuesday looking on Twitter and seeing that Randy Orton, quite late at night for him, I think it in the time zones it would have been about 4 o'clock in the morning, having some back and forth tweets with Soldier Boy all over whether wrestling is fake, as Soldier Boy called it, and who would do better in each other's world. And it was it was entertaining. If you don't follow Randy Orton on Twitter, I would recommend it. He just put some quality content out on Twitter from time to time. So
yeah, it was bizarre. It was very bizarre and very weird to wake up to on Tuesday morning here in the UK. And some very funny things came off the back of it. I proudly tweeted out. I'm very proud. I thought it was very entertaining myself. That I wish Randy Orton was as entertaining in the ring as he is on Twitter. I thought that was quite funny from me. But also, someone that we both follow on Twitter and both like, Adam Pacitti, he tweeted Randy Orton, didn't he? He tweeted Soldier Boy, didn't he?
He tweeted Soldier Boy claiming to be a WWE wrestler and would fight him. And he actually got a response, and I don't know who is more relevant in their kind of following in 2021, whether a Soldier Boy has more fans from being involved in rap or Adam Pacitti from wrestling fans, but it was weird to see that collision.
It was very strange, because I think Soldier Boy genuinely believed that Pacitti was a wrestler as well, which is the funny thing.
I've followed him since his days in What Culture to now. He's been quite an interesting thing. He's a big fan of wrestling, but he's a bit of a troll artist on Twitter. And
he is. I've seen him do stuff in like Isle of Wight community groups and things like that. It just makes me chuckle what he does.
He does, and that was just kind of the icing on the cake for that, of this weird interaction. I love seeing interactions like that between people you wouldn't expect, and that's another great thing to come out of it. Maybe one day that will be us. We'll have weird Twitter beef with some celebrity for no apparent reason. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the first time Soldier Boy has been relevant since 2005, so fair play to him.
I was going to say one final thing on it is about wrestling being called fake, as two people who have taken a few wrestling moves by going to a very dodgy wrestling school in our teenage years. It might be scripted, but it still hurts like hell.
Especially if you're falling onto one of those thin blue mats that you used to have in PE, which we did, which doesn't protect your spine a lot when you hit the floor.
No, that was kind of the day I learnt that I didn't have what it takes to be a wrestler. Even if I did go to the gym for like 5 years and get really buff, I don't think I could like take bumps on a day-to-day basis, and like that was when wrestlers kind of got more respect. Like
No,
doing that
yeah,
200
and
days of the year is intense.
another thing that made you realise that you weren't cut out to be a wrestler is I think one of the instructors said, "Oh, you'd be a fantastic referee. You've got the look of a referee." So
Yeah, that's
I think your wrestling career was done before it even began, unfortunately for you.
yeah. I'll just stick to discussing what I like and dislike about wrestling events, and I think that is a great segue to move into the main portion of our show.
Unfortunately, we'll never get Big Daddy Cross, but let's move into the wrestling action from Monday Night Raw.
Monday Night Raw.
A mixed show for me. It had a theme throughout the show, which we'll get into, which was entertaining. It had some sections that were so bad they were funny, and it had some just purely bad sections as well. But the show started off with Sheamus versus Drew McIntyre, which has been a story which has been going on for the best part of a few months, I think, since the beginning of January. It was a really, really good, hard-hitting match. The only thing that disappointed me was that it was blown off on Raw, and it wasn't sort of a pay-per-view match.
Yeah, I didn't really think too much of it at the time about it being on Raw because it was quite an enjoyable match between the two of them. It's the sort of thing we was kind of expecting them to have. We were talking about it the other week that we thought this was going to be a potential WrestleMania feud or maybe like a Fastlane feud when Drew still had the title. So I didn't really think too much about it, but yeah, maybe it would have been better at a pay-per-view. I do feel that when you have a good match on Raw, it's one thing, but having that same match on a pay-per-view kind of adds a little bit more to the kind of storytelling of it. Hopefully, somewhere down the line there is a feud for this, but yeah, that's more my thoughts. I enjoyed it, but it did leave me kind of wanting something like what we could have had rather than what we got. Which
Yeah, agreed. It could have been something a lot more, and it's just a bit of a shame that it's been blown off on a Monday Night Raw rather than at a pay-per-view, because presumably Drew's going to be going into the WWE title picture leading into WrestleMania now. But the next thing I wanted to discuss on Monday Night Raw was Charlotte Flair getting back into the Raw Women's title match, into the Raw Women's title picture, sorry. Charlotte essentially came out, there was a quick video package of Asuka getting her tooth kicked out by Shayna Baszler last week, and essentially she said, Lacey Evans was in the title picture, now she's not, so I'm going to be in the title picture. That's the long and short of it, without the meat on the bones. What are your thoughts on Charlotte being back in the title picture?
Charlotte in the title picture is one of those things that it's a problem WWE have had for a while. Now, Charlotte is great in the ring, and when given the right story, is great on the microphone as well. The problem is that WWE seems to fixate on one person being their top star, and they've done this pretty much since the 80s with the men's. Obviously, Hogan was always in the picture, even if he dropped the title. Sooner or later, he's getting another opportunity, and we've had that kind of ever since. You go through like Hogan, you go from Hogan to Stone Cold, and then we've got like the Rock, then to Cena, and then to the last few years with Roman Reigns. And they always seem to fixate on one person, and it's not worked with the men, and they have a stacked roster of top talent. So there's plenty of people to face them, and you can kind of make that work. The problem is with the women's roster is if you keep giving Charlotte the opportunity at the title and giving her the title, you don't build anyone else up, and there's no one to challenge. At least with like Lacey Evans challenging for the title, it was not something new. She has had title matches in the past, but it's another person in the main event. Like, you've got more stories. Like, outside of them, who else is built up to have that place? And the problem is because they just keep giving it to Charlotte. Like, she is great, but you need to build other people up, not just keep going back to the same person.
My problem with the whole Charlotte character since she's come back is that they seem to be portraying her as a babyface, but everything she does has heel tendencies, but they're still trying to push forward that she's a good guy. And it just seems like the complete wrong portrayal of her character to me, and it's just not connecting. I actually really like Charlotte. I think, like you say, she's probably one of, if not the best, female performers. And a match between her and Asuka could be great. You could again have the rematch angle from WrestleMania a few years ago. But there's another problem with the Raw Women's division on as a whole, if you want, that it just seems to be stagnant at the minute. Asuka is like sort of a dominant champion. That's how she should be portrayed, as someone to be feared by all of the rest of the roster, but she seems to have lost any sort of heat that she had and any sort of aura that she's had. I couldn't even tell you the last title defense she had. I literally can't think of it off the top of my head at all without searching it. It kind of feels like they've lost any sort of interest in Asuka and the whole Raw women's division as a whole. I don't know, would you agree with that?
It does feel that way. And I do think that just comes down to the fact that there is so few women who have been set up to be potential challengers. Like, if you look over on SmackDown, there is 4 or 5 women that could be in a title match. Like, we didn't have any women's elimination chamber this year. The only one you could have had a SmackDown one, but I don't think you could have had a Raw one where everyone felt like a genuine competitor. And that is not to say about their ability in the ring. There's loads of talented women they have, but the way that they are portrayed just doesn't lead them to be kind of your main event level character. And I don't think Charlotte being in the WrestleMania title picture helps that. The only thing I can think of is it's a red herring. Like, we're meant to think, oh no, Charlotte's going to have the title match, but she's actually going to get attacked by Rhea Ripley, and they're going to set that up instead.
Well, I think that's going to be the match at WrestleMania. I don't think Asuka goes into Mania as champion, as I've said before. But
yeah,
a wider problem is that they've got so many women in the whole of the company, let alone Raw, that could be standout female stars in that company. You look at them, you've got Shayna Baszler, you've got Naomi, just to name 2 of a lot on Raw, that would be brilliant singles competitors. But for some reason, they're just stuck in tag teams with people that they've got no real connection with. Yet, WWE have split up the Iconics in the last year, who are a legit tag team. If you go over to SmackDown, they've got the Riot Squad, who seem to lose every single week. Put the tag titles on them, get the singles stars out of there, and build them up as actual characters and people to be feared. Shayna Baszler is a really, really, really good wrestler. Could be billed to be an absolute killer, as she was in NXT, and as she was when she first came up to the main roster. Forget about her vampire antics, but at the Elimination Chamber, the last pay-per-view that we watched together before the plague hit, she absolutely dominated the Elimination Chamber and eliminated everyone. And then they ruined her by bloody beating her with a roll-up at WrestleMania, and since then she just hasn't recovered.
It feels to me sometimes, and it's not just a problem with the women's division, it is kind of a problem that WWE have as a whole, but the women's division highlights it quite well.
Yeah.
It feels like Vince and whoever else is running things behind the show, I think it's Bruce Pritchard. It feels like they're playing the WWE Universe mode on the 2K game, and they've just simmed like 2 years ahead. And if you've ever played one of those games, what happens when you do that is random people sometimes get like the titles, and tag teams will just randomly form and break up, and it feels like that is what happens. There's so many tag teams that get broken up and then don't have a direction, and then those wrestlers end up in other tag teams. Don't make any sense really when you think about it. You've got the same thing at the moment with Chad Gable and Otis, 2 tag team wrestlers from other tag teams that have now been paired together. You question why? Why was it an experiment to see them as single stars that didn't work, and you put them back together? Yeah, is a problem that runs through the entire of WWE, but right now the women's division on Raw is really kind of showing that problem, and it needs some work.
Yeah, absolutely. And from one mess of a division over to a hot, sweaty mess of a man, let's talk about Shane McMahon's involvement in this week's show. A segment that was probably my least favourite on the whole show and a real down point of Raw this week. Okay, so this segment, Braun Strowman essentially asked for a WWE title match. Why? God knows. He's awful as it is and was probably one of the worst Universal Champions in recent memory. But that's a separate story. Shane McMahon essentially says, no, I'm not giving you a title match. You lost to Bobby Lashley last week, but you can have another match with, and you can team up with Adam Pearce and face the tag team champions for the tag team titles. Weird, stupid, doesn't really make any sense. Strowman would end up in the match dominating the tag team champions, let us remember, laying, I think it was Shelton Benjamin on the floor for Adam Pearce. Shane McMahon would jump up onto the ring and say, oh yeah, tag in Pearce. So Braun would reluctantly tag him in, Adam Pearce would get in the ring and get rolled up. This seems to be leading towards a match between Braun Strowman and Shane McMahon at WrestleMania. I think it could potentially be one of my least favourite matches in WrestleMania history ever, if it does go to that. I don't like Braun Strowman as it is. He was stale 2 years ago, let alone now. It just does some stupid choo-choo train around the ring, and he bores me. But I guess Shane McMahon will jump off a boat or something at him, and people will like it.
Yeah, it does feel like that's kind of the build we're getting. I don't really mind a Shane McMahon match. You kind of know exactly what you're going to get with it.
He jumps off high things, essentially.
Yeah, you're gonna get a moment where Shane McMahon jumps off something ridiculous or does some crazy dive or spot or there's gonna be something. I do feel that WrestleMania needs one of those moments, and if Shane's the only person crazy enough to do it, let him. Like, Shane can jump off the Hell in a Cell like he did the other year against The Undertaker, or get fired out of the pirate ship cannon as we predicted like a little while ago, and he can then go home and rest for 2 or 3 months. And as long as obviously he's taking precautions to be safe, I wouldn't want to see him get hurt, but he's not required to perform as much as another wrestler. So if you want a crazy spot and Shane's like, yeah, I'll do it, like I'm happy to see that. Yeah, Braun has been pretty bad for a while now.
I don't think I can ever forgive him after that swamp match with The Fiend. That was probably my least favourite moment of last year. Yeah, including the pandemic. I put that above the pandemic.
Braun Strowman keeps having moments where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, like I can get behind this, and then they never capitalise on it. When he's hot, they don't do anything with him, and when his momentum's gone, they're like, oh, maybe we should give him a title run. It kind of reminds me of kind of like the way they booked Ryback when everybody was chanting "Feed me more." They put him in a title match, screwed him over, and then they're like, "Oh, what? Look, it didn't work out." And it's like, yeah, because you're not capitalising when you've got something good, and then eventually you don't have that anymore. And it's kind of what's happened with Braun. Like, he had the get these hands momentum. They've just kind of not capitalised on it, and
I think it's more the dynamic for me between Shane and Braun that I can't really get on board with. Out of all the people that I'd put Shane McMahon in a match with, Braun Strowman would be probably towards the bottom of that list.
Only saving grace I'll say about this entire setup on Raw this week is because Braun Strowman's a heel. I think he's meant to be a heel, but because he's kind of a heel at the minute, it makes it look very likely, almost certain, that we're not going to see Braun and Nicholas team up again at WrestleMania. Because I was so worried when he was getting the tag match. I was like, oh god, are we going to get...
I would have took Nicholas over what we got. Going back to the match itself, it does frustrate me that they do this quite often, where they get sort of a big name from the singles division in with a random tag team partner against the tag champions, and the singles person just runs over the tag team champions, and it just makes them
Yeah.
look pathetic. Like, how are you meant to take tag team wrestling seriously when you can just have one guy come in and completely wipe them out? It's really annoying for me. And I thought that for a second, I thought that Braun was actually going to win, and they were going to ruin what happened later in the night when you have sort of a good faction. We'll get to that.
You kind of mentioned it in what you said there, but I think the problem is WWE don't take tag wrestling seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that is the root of the problem. And as far as I can tell, it is a Vince thing, not a WWE thing, because NXT tag division has been pretty good at times over the last number of years. So as long as Vince McMahon is in charge, I feel like we're not going to have a sensible tag division. So whilst we're on the topic of Hurt Business, shall we discuss the main story of Monday Night Raw? Because there's one last little bit, but I feel like we should save that kind of for our final point here. So we'll talk about the Bobby Lashley Miz storyline.
Let's.
I'll kind of run through this one. So the story begins at the show with the Miz and Bobby Lashley match being announced, and we get 3 teasers for this match. So the first time they come out and the Miz no shows. You cut to backstage and he's pretending that he's got a stomachache. The match gets pushed back another hour, and he comes out, but this time he runs away, and they're like, no, not having that. We're gonna have it as the main event, and this time it's a lumberjack match, and Bobby Lashley basically squashes the Miz to become the new WWE champion. Now, personally, I really liked the story that was told with the Miz trying to weasel his way out of the matches with Bobby Lashley. Makes Bobby Lashley feel like an intimidating character. The Miz does not want to have that match. The only thing I personally would have changed if I was in control is it wouldn't all have happened on one show. I'm never the biggest fan of the really short title run, the week or 2 weeks. So I possibly would have stretched it out and maybe had that match happen at the next pay-per-view. But that's just a personal preference. I don't think there's anything wrong with the story. It just happened a little quicker than I personally would have liked. But what were your thoughts?
Usually I tend to agree that I don't like the short title run, but I think in this occasion it fits into the story perfectly. With Miz being so desperate to actually get the title that he almost does a deal with the devil, if you want, and it's backfired on him big time. But the end result is perfect. I like the end match. Going back to the theme of the whole show, I like the whole theme of the show, that it ran throughout the whole show from beginning to end. That is Miz going to actually do this match? Yeah. It sort of. I didn't watch it live, and I don't know how it would have come across live, but it sort of gave you that investment to watch the show all the way through for a payoff. But yeah, the final match, when it actually did happen, I like that Lashley just went over Miz in, I think it was 2 minutes, if that, or 3 minutes or something. It was really short from memory. Yeah, and Bobby Lashley just seems to have a new lease on life since he started with the Hurt Business, and he's just got this aura about him that he is what he should have been for a long time, a really tough dude that you don't want to fight. And like I said last week, if it's Bobby versus Drew at Mania, that's the perfect headliner for night 1 of WrestleMania.
Yeah, if that is the match we get, which it does kind of feel like it might be, could and should be a good match. The Miz got his record out of it, of being the first 2-time Grand Slam champion.
Glam Slam.
That's the Beth Phoenix's finisher move, isn't it? It feels like the Miz didn't get anything from it because he just kind of held the title for a week and presumably going to go down the card and do something with Bad Bunny. We did get the right result. Dominant heel Bobby Lashley could be very interesting. Hopefully, this is gonna be controversial, but if he does fight Drew at WrestleMania, I feel like the obvious answer would be to have Drew win, to have it be in front of a crowd. But I wouldn't. I'd actually be happier to see Bobby Lashley carry on this title for a little longer. At the minute, we'll see how the build might change my mind, but I feel like giving Bobby Lashley a decent title run could be just what WWE programming needs at the minute.
I like both the guys, so it's a win-win for me. Whoever wins that match, I'll be happy. But look, Bobby Lashley is finally getting booked in the way that he should have been for a long time, and I'm a happy man because of it. Big bad Bobby Lashley in his tights with his strong glutes. Good old Bobby. Now from the sublime, shall we go to the bizarre?
Yeah, we had a good old bit of fun last week with the Randy Orton segment, and it's the gift that keeps on giving.
There's still hints of the Fiend every single week, and it seems to be making Randy's knees weak.
If you haven't watched Monday Night Raw, or perhaps just missed this segment, this week had a recap of what happened last week with Randy Orton coughing up the Fiend's weird black goo, followed by Alexa Bliss. She had a Jack in the Box, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And is implying that like the Fiend is coming back. Like she's trying to summon the Fiend back, and it cuts back to kind of a hooded figure in cloaked in shadow, slowly walking towards the camera. And you might be thinking, we got to see the Fiend, but you'd be wrong, because what happened instead was a demonic version of Randy Orton confronted regular Randy Orton through the magic of television. God. He's full on black eyes and a echoey voice, and I can't even remember what he said. I literally, before the podcast, just recapped that segment because it was one of those so bad it's good. But you don't even take in what he's saying because you're just in awe of this kind of weird image that you're being shown on TV. And I think they're continuing to set up this potential Firefly Funhouse match, because I'm trying to remember what he said. I do think he says something about you.
Yeah, he said you'll be punished for your sins or something like that, or you'll face up to your sins that you've done
in the past. Yeah, it's implying that there's some reckoning coming for Randy Orton's previous misdeeds, and that definitely has suggestions of a cinematic kind of match. So maybe at WrestleMania we'll get Randy Orton versus Randy Orton.
Who knows? It's just more bizarre stuff, isn't it?
Very up and down on the Randy Orton Fiend story as it's progressed, and I'm definitely back in the up column. Like, it was bad, it was cheesy, but I really want to know what's going to happen next. Like, I can't.
Yeah, I feel like I'm perversely interested.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, you just can't wait to see like what they're going to do next time. Like, how bad is it going to be? That might not be the reason WWE want you to tune in, but I'm sure they'll be happy that people are tuning in. Like,
obviously, this is going to WrestleMania. It's going to be a Firefly Funhouse match. Like we said the other week, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how they depict Randy Orton throughout the years, if that's what they go for, like they did with John Cena. And also, I was thinking, last year they obviously had to do the cinematic match because there was obviously no crowds, but this year there is going to be crowds. So are they just going to do this match completely on screen and let all of the crowds in the arena watch the screens, or are they going to somehow intertwine some in-ring stuff? It's going to be interesting to see how they do it, because I don't know how I'd feel if I paid all that money to go to a WrestleMania and then I watch a half-an-hour segment of it on a screen that I could just do at home anywhere.
Yeah, that's obviously a bit of a negative for those in attendance. But at the minute, we don't really know what the in attendance WrestleMania is going to look like. We're told
I think we've got a pretty good idea.
Right?
Yeah, we've got a pretty good idea, because from the Super Bowl, which was held at Raymond James, they had, I think it was just under 30,000 fans there. And there was cardboard cutouts in between the fans, sort of to help with social distancing, and it also created the illusion when I was watching on TV. It actually looked, when you were watching the match, like it was a full stadium full of fans. So if they go with that, it'll be pretty cool. And if they get anywhere sort of anywhere near to 25,000-30,000, that'll be awesome. Also, it's just come to my mind. Obviously, in the NFL, they have the pitch, but the ring's a lot smaller than the pitch. So maybe they'll even get some more people in there because they'll have some sort of ring tier seating.
The only thing I'll say about that is the NFL is a very popular American sport, and I don't know if WWE has the kind of popularity to pull in 30,000 plus people during a pandemic when you can only really have people. You can't have any international audience.
They'll definitely get 30,000, man.
I'm certain there'll be plenty of people who would like to go, but it's whether WWE still has that number. We've seen it for a number of years now of like viewing figures and stuff dropping, and I know WrestleMania is normally the exception to the rule just because of how big it is, but how many they actually can fill a stadium with may not be as much. So it'll be interesting to see what we get. I would guess it'll be some kind of halfway between having like sections of crowd and sections of screens rather than cardboard cutouts, but who knows.
It'll be good to just have some sort of crowd in attendance. It sort of feels like a lifetime ago that we watched wrestling with a crowd.
It definitely adds something to the atmosphere. The Thunderdome has been great for atmosphere, even though it is kind of faked as they are pumping in the crowd noise. It's not genuine, but when you're
a million times
home,
better than that PC Performance Centre sort of fake crowd or no crowd, isn't it?
They've kind of offered the same thing to here in England to the Premier League football. You can have it with crowd noise added or without, and the atmosphere is so much better. Just even though you know it's someone just like pressing a button going, make the audience cheer or make them boo or make them chant, like it just makes it. It gives you that opportunity to just kind of switch off and forget that everything's kind of going crazy. And just
forget that we're in the plague. We went off on a bit of a tangent there.
But... Yeah, we did go off on a bit of a tangent there, but not got as much to talk about this week with no pay-per-view, so I don't know, maybe a little bit of a tangent isn't always a bad thing. I don't think there's too much more we can talk about with Raw. There's a few other segments, but they're still kind of developing, so hopefully once they develop into a bit more of a story, we can address them. But let's move over to SmackDown.
Friday Night SmackDown.
So this week's show was quite interesting, I think. I've just finished watching it. It's now Saturday afternoon for us here in the UK. Show was a bit up and down. It felt a little bit slow at times, but overall I'd say it was quite a positive show.
Yeah, it was a show of peaks and troughs for me. A peak at the beginning, with the Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns segment at the beginning, into a trough until the end of the show, where Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan would appear again.
Yeah, SmackDown's normally the kind of the better of the two quote main shows from WWE, but it did feel a little bit this week that it couldn't quite hold up to Raw, but there was still a couple of good moments on it. So we'll start with the one we both agree on, which was the Universal title storyline. We've spoken about it a little bit over the last few weeks about saying how we didn't really understand how Daniel Bryan fit into the story, and I'm still a little unsure about how that will progress as we go into WrestleMania. But for anyone who hasn't watched SmackDown when they're listening to this, the show started with Daniel Bryan kind of being interviewed almost by Michael Cole, and we were informed as viewers that he has a match against Jey Uso tonight in a side of steel cage. If he wins, he gets a Universal title shot at Fastlane, which then proceeded into a segment with Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, and Paul Heyman, and Daniel Bryan. There's still this little part of me that thinks, are we going to get a triple threat at WrestleMania?
For me, the whole promo at the beginning of the show by Bryan, it brought me into a triple threat at WrestleMania. It actually wants me for him to go in there. I really, really, really want it to be a triple threat now. I'm not going to be happy if it isn't a triple threat and Bryan's not involved in the title picture. He just showed so much fire, and it's for a rare occasion with WWE. It was a promo that actually got me really, really invested, and I was like, damn man, Bryan would be awesome in the main event. I'm not really into Edge just facing Roman Reigns on his own now. I want a triple threat. I really, really want it.
Yeah, there was a few segments with Daniel Bryan. Obviously the promo. There was also a backstage segment with Jey Uso where Bryan kind of like blindsided him, getting a drop on him before Jey Uso could do the same to him. Which really kind of gave his character that little bit of badassery that Daniel Bryan's character has often lacked in the times they portray him as the underdog babyface. But this time it was kind of like, he knows what he wants and he's going to go and try and take it. He's still a good guy, but he's not going to take any shit, kind of Daniel Bryan.
I like the story leading into real life as well, that he didn't really have his focus on wrestling for the last year, and he was more focusing on winding down, becoming a father and spending more time at home. But after that loss at the Elimination Chamber to Reigns, he's got that hunger back now.
Yeah.
And he's got that drive. And I thought that sort of interlink between real life and storyline actually worked really well, and it blended well together.
Yeah, when WWE kind of blur the lines between story and real life, often we get the best storylines out of that. It's not always the case, but I do feel like this is one that did benefit from that. We've seen a lot of reports online about Daniel Bryan becoming less of a full-time wrestler, and to tie that actually in on the show was quite a good moment from it. I would like to see a triple threat between them. I do feel kind of a little bad for Edge in that though, because it just kind of feel that a lot of people wanted Daniel Bryan to be the champion. They wanted him to win the Royal Rumble. I believe you even made that as your prediction. And we got Edge.
Yeah.
And people were a little bit disappointed, but also like the Edge returning from injury story kind of was good. And I feel like with them kind of putting Bryan into the title picture, that if they don't then do something with that, do we risk the same thing happening as it did at WrestleMania 30?
The problem that they've got is that they've given us a glimpse of what a Reigns versus Bryan match would look like, a feud would look like going into Mania. And for me, anyway, I'm not sure what it's like as a whole, but for me, it's made me really want it, and it's given me that taste, and now I want it more than anything.
Yeah.
I'd happily Edge just be chucked aside. And the problem that they've got is Edge said that he was going to be pretty much a full-timer leading into WrestleMania, and he wanted to be a full-timer. He didn't want to be like a Goldberg and just show up for a couple of dates a week, but he wasn't on this show. I feel like we're getting more Daniel Bryan versus Reigns at the minute than what we're getting Edge versus Reigns. From my perspective, I'm more invested in a Bryan Reigns story than I am Edge Reigns story at the minute, because we've just not been given pretty much anything from Edge Reigns since Elimination Chamber.
Yeah, that is a good point. I do feel like they do it not in a way of like, oh, we don't. I feel like it's kind of to protect the story. Like Roman Reigns doesn't do much on the weekly shows. I feel I feel like it's a trend that happens every year around this time. Of you keep your main title match competitors safe. You don't want them risking an injury and changing plans. So I feel like it might be that, but it still would have been nice to have Edge on the show in some capacity. But maybe I don't know what he would have done. Maybe that's why he wasn't on this week. It wasn't so much of that. It was what do you have him do that fits into this story. Hopefully we see him next week and we can start developing a storyline.
This is the problem we've got with the secondary pay-per-view before WrestleMania, though, because you're having to build a story into a pay-per-view, and it feels like the WrestleMania feud has took a back seat to a Fastlane feud, and I don't think that's the way it should be. But what did you think of the actual cage match itself? at the end of SmackDown between Bryan and Jey Uso.
Apart from the fact it was a cage match, and I always find cage matches to be a little bit of a weird story that you tell within the match. I liked it. I've never been a huge fan of the cage match as it's portrayed, with someone trying to escape, because it doesn't really feel like it fits a lot of characters. Try to run away match, but in this instance, it did, because it wasn't a case of them trying actually going for the escape. Like, they did do that a bit, but obviously the match ended with a tap out victory for Daniel Bryan. I felt like it did kind of fit the story. It stopped the count up from last week. It also prevented any interference from Roman Reigns. So it did kind of what it was meant to do. I just normally don't like the dynamics of a steel cage match.
Agreed. That's a wider problem though. In AEW, their cage matches that they have, it's not escape or win by pin and submission. It's just you have to beat your opponent in the cage. There is no escape, which I think is a flaw in WWE's cage matches. But I really, really like the match. I thought it was a really good match between Bryan and Uso, and I really like the finish as well. That butterfly suplex off the top rope, and Bryan transitioned into the label lock. With ease. I thought that was awesome.
The transition,
that was really, really cool.
The transition into the label lock, he did it a couple of times, trying to attempt it with the kind of like, it's hard to describe what he does, but kind of like the rolling transition, and it looks like really intricate. And I don't know if it is or not. It's a bit hard to follow sometimes. It all happens so quick, but it was quite a nice transition into the move. Yeah, that's what you want from your more wrestle-oriented wrestlers, to have those kind of transitions. We saw it a little bit, I think, at the Royal Rumble with, was it Daniel Bryan and Matt Riddle?
It's Matt Riddle, wasn't it? Yeah.
They were doing a lot of the kind of transition wrestling stuff, and you possibly wouldn't want an entire match built around it. It's something that's good in small doses, but yeah, it's cool to see. Of like, oh yeah, that's showing that little bit of talent. And obviously we had the dragging him. Jey Uso dragged himself over to the ropes trying to break the hold, and obviously it doesn't do anything in a steel cage, which was nice as well. I thought for a second like it was gonna break it, and I was like, oh no, like WWE, you forgot one of your rules again. But no, they did remember, and Daniel Bryan gets the win and looks good going into this match with Roman Reigns.
And that was definitely the highlight of SmackDown, I think, for both of us this week. So switching gears to something that I definitely liked this week on SmackDown. I'm not sure if you liked it. We haven't discussed it before we recorded. But it was the progression of this new Apollo character. His Nigerian royalty character began last week, where he announced that he was in line to Nigerian royalty. And this week he would come out draped in his Nigerian scarf, and he's got his new tights on. He's got a sword in his hand, and he's flanked. It's a spear, actually, isn't it? A spear in his hand, I think. And he's flanked by 2 guards, I guess, or some soldiers with him. I thought, okay, this presentation looks cool. And then he got the mic, and he started speaking, and he was doing a Nigerian accent. For me, it came as a bit of a shock, actually, that he had the Nigerian accent. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but my initial thoughts were Kofi Kingston Jamaican accent when I heard it, because he was sort of convincing at the beginning, but then every now and then you'd get the American accent coming through halfway in between. But it's not something I'm against. It goes into his character. I think he did similar in his indie career as Utah Nation. I'm pretty sure it was a similar character that he was portraying. I might be wrong on that. If I am, apologies, but I'm pretty sure that was the character that he was portraying before he came to NXT. So it's something that he's well versed with. But I'm liking this Apollo character, and it's obviously leading to a match between him and Big E. Big E's returning next week, so I'm looking forward to the interactions between them.
So when this segment started on SmackDown, with him stood there, flanked by his 2 guards, I can't remember what it was he explicitly called them, but there was a part of me that dreaded having to do this review segment, because as 2 white guys reviewing this, it's going to be one of those subjects that we have to be a little bit careful, kind of like on our opinions, like because it's not something we're going to know a lot about. But because it's WWE, I was a little concerned about where it's going. Their tastefulness has never been their strongest point. It's still very early, and I'm not sure entirely whether having him be flanked by guards and carry a spear to the ring and do his Nigerian accent, which I did have a little bit of a look online. It is getting mixed reviews. I'm not sure whether it's going to be the best thing for Apollo. I hope that this kind of concern is all unfounded and we get a great storyline with Apollo, and maybe in a year's time he's challenging for like the top title or something. Who knows? That could happen. But I am a little concerned about WWE's ability to handle this tastefully.
I don't know about that. I didn't really have those sort of issues. I didn't think about that. I was just taken aback by the accent itself and his performance of the accent. I thought it was a bit ropey at times, and that was my only initial thoughts. It wasn't a case of, is this insensitive or stuff. I thought him being flanked by the guards, it kind of gave him a presence that he hasn't had before, and like a presence of this. Right, this is a guy that shouldn't be messed with. It wasn't a case of sort of any insensitivity or anything.
Well, I don't think it is at the moment. I think how maybe the spear was a bit much, but then again, Drew McIntyre comes out with a claymore, so
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with what we saw on SmackDown, but just because of past kind of things with WWE, there was that kind of please don't let this don't let this get insensitive. If it is already insensitive and we've just missed something, then there's not really much we can say about that. But I was a little worried. But hopefully next week we're talking about an awesome segment that occurred between Apollo and Big E. So
definitely, yeah, some sort of confrontation between Big E and Apollo. I'm really liking. What shall we talk about? I'll give you two choices. Shall we talk about Reginald, or shall we talk about Buddy Murphy?
Let's start with Reginald and the women's championships, plural, segments, because for a number of weeks now we've been confused by this, but I think I'm finally starting to see a storyline developing. I think I'm finally starting to figure out where WWE are going with this. Now that I've said that, they're going to completely do something different next week, and I'm going to have no idea. But the story this week is obviously Reginald has been fired by Carmella, and then
which is what I liked. I liked that a bit.
Yeah,
I think it was sort of good at that point. Carmella fires Reginald. Cool. We know her stance.
Yeah, it kind of fits with what's been shown. Then he kind of interferes in the match between Shayna Baszler and Bianca Belair. Not directly, but he kind of comes out, and there's a moment with Nia Jax and Sasha Banks. Sorry, I'm forgetting names now. Outside the ring, which kind of
that's right.
Kind of leads into the story a bit further. It causes Nia Jax to run into Sasha Banks, and it kind of sets up this whole kind of distraction thing. And it's starting to show a little bit of tension between this weird team between Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, which I like. We do need some confrontation between them. And then the final moment on this segment this week is a confrontation backstage between Reginald and the women's tag team champions, where Nia Jax takes an interest in Reginald because she could say he's cute or something like that. Some positive word about his appearance.
Yeah.
Now this is obviously all leading towards a Fastlane match for the titles.
Again.
Obviously last time...
We'll come to that in a minute, because I want to talk about that.
Obviously last time that cost me our predictions. But the whole segment was... Well, all the segments They felt a little odd, but I do kind of see the pieces coming together for this story. Whether the story is good or not, I think we'll have to wait and see how it plays out a bit more. But at least there is some kind of picture starting to develop, is what I'll say on that.
It's sort of a half picture for me, because obviously he's now no longer aligned with Carmella. Fine, get that out of the way. But there's meant to be some sort of connection between Sasha and Reginald, and I can't see what the connection is from Sasha's side. I have no idea what the benefit is of her having him around. I'm presuming that he likes her. He has sort of a crush on her in a way, but that's never actually been explained. So that's the huge sort of plot flaw in the story. It's just not been explained at all. I can see where, I guess, kind of Nia Jax can see why there is a connection between them, because she's sort of going to play on that, I'm guessing, leading into the women's title match, and that's how they're going to retain, blah 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 blah.
That would make sense.
It's got some sort of direction, but there's a huge plot flaw, like I say. I just want to speak about the women's title match as well. Why on earth have they booked Sasha and Bianca in another tag team match for the women's titles? Surely there's no winner coming out of this. Either you have the women's tag team champions losing to two singles stars, or you have your number one contender for the women's championship lose, or you have the biggest, arguably the biggest star in the WWE in Sasha Banks lose. Who's winning coming out of this match? It just makes no sense to me at all. It's a match that just isn't needed whatsoever at Fastlane.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. I can't really argue with anything you've said there. It may very well be another case of WWE backing themselves into a corner, or booking themselves into a corner. Sorry.
It absolutely is. It just makes no sense to me. I was so baffled when I saw they announced it.
I was more baffled because they announced it midweek with no build to it.
Yeah.
If they had announced
literally had no build whatsoever.
If they'd announced it on SmackDown, it kind of would have made a little bit more sense. Like I said, we've still got 2 weeks until Fastlane, so there's that's 4 hours of SmackDown. There's plenty of time for them to develop this story further and to actually get something resembling a reasonable outcome from that match. But yeah, at the minute, it doesn't look good for that match.
It just feels like another consequence of having this Fastlane pay-per-view before Mania. It's like, okay, we don't have a secondary storyline for the women's title going into this pay-per-view, and we don't have a secondary storyline for the women's tag team titles going into the pay-per-view. Alright, let's just stick them both together and just do a repeat of a match that wasn't needed at Elimination Chamber, and is definitely not needed at Fastlane. It just seems lazy to me, and
yeah,
I just wish that they'd keep the tag division and the singles division apart from each other.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on with the women's tag team match. There's a feud on all three WWE brands around those titles. Obviously, they've been slowly building to a Naomi and Lana versus Nia and Shayna match. That's been kind of...
Are they not... Are Naomi and Lana not number one contenders, or have I dreamed that up? I'm sure they won a match that meant they were number one contenders.
I thought that too, but maybe we missed that. Maybe like someone's hurt and they're having to hold off on the match. Obviously on NXT they had a match this week which kind of had a bit of controversy in it. I didn't actually see NXT, but I did see that there was some controversy there in kind of how it ended.
Oh, it was an awful NXT and an awful match, so you didn't miss anything.
And they've got this story on SmackDown, so there's a lot for them to do. WWE really like the team of Nia and Shayna, despite the fact that a lot of the audience tends to not like the team of Nia and Shayna.
I just really hope they don't mess up Sasha and Bianca. That's all I hope. Please, God, just don't mess it up. It's just on a plate for you, man.
Yeah, come on, Vince. Just give us the singles match between them at WrestleMania with no weirdness going on around it. That's all we want. I mean, that's not all we want, but that's all we want from this story.
Let's leave that, because it's making my head hurt anyway. It's just such a mess. It's making my head hurt and making me sad. But let's go over to Oh, it doesn't really get much better actually. For what we're going to go over to for me. Let's go over to Buddy Murphy or Murphy or whatever the hell they're calling him now.
Yeah,
He's randomly appeared back on SmackDown.
Yeah.
And it was stupid.
So I can't remember if we mentioned it last week or if it was just something that we've mentioned outside of the podcast, but we did kind of query where Murphy has been. We haven't seen him in a while. And then this week he just pops up to talk to Seth, and Seth's like, "Oh, don't you come anywhere near me. I don't want to talk to you. Don't like you." And it seems that Murphy is trying to get back into Seth's good books. And if I'm not mistaken, we had like a few months of storyline about how much they hate each other.
It wasn't a few months. I think it was like 8 months. It was 8 months leading up to Murphy getting rid of Seth Rollins, and he's just randomly turned back up and wants to get back with Seth Rollins. What the hell, man? Come on.
Yeah.
What the fuck? This doesn't make any sense at all. I nearly threw my phone through the TV when this came on. Look, this is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I can't say I'm invested in Murphy Rollins program again. The only thing I could think of is they were like, "Oh, we want to have a match for Cesaro on SmackDown. We want Seth Rollins to be on commentary, so we're going to do that." And they're like, "Who can we have him face?" And they look down the roster, and then they got Buddy Murphy. And they're like, "Yeah, we'll put Buddy Murphy, but they'll have a good match together." And then someone went, "But he knows, like, he's got a big history with Seth Rollins, so they're like, oh, quick, we'll just throw this segment to kind of tie everything together." And hopefully it's not going to go any further. I like Murphy. I preferred him when he was Buddy Murphy than just Murphy, but he needs a better story than just going back to Seth Rollins. It's like it's almost like having a friend that keeps trying to get back with their ex. You're like, "Don't you remember what happened last time? Stop it. Just stay away from him."
Yeah. Oh man, it's so stupid, isn't it? Until we've just talked about it now, I think I'm actually worse. I feel more down on SmackDown now than I did when I was actually watching it, because this was really, really dumb, and they're at risk of ruining all of the good work they've done over the last few months.
I like to stay positive on WWE and focus on the good rather than the bad, but sometimes they don't make it easy.
No, not with lazy, stupid stuff like this. Like, you've literally had 8 months of telling the story of Seth Rollins and Murphy and the eventual split.
I think that's everything for SmackDown. I can't think of anything that really jumped out on me. There was obviously a few other segments. There was a continuation of the Baron Corbin and Sami Zayn story, but I don't really have much.
More of the same.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say on it this week.
That was SmackDown.
Yeah.
The main event picture was good. The rest of it, ropey, is how I'd sum it up.
That's exactly what I would say as well.
The big question.
So the big question for this week is, what is our favourite celebrity involvement in wrestling? This comes off the back of the Shaquille O'Neal match in AEW, which was very, very good. Tag team match with him and Jade Cargill versus Red Velvet and Cody Rhodes. Really, really good match. One of the better celebrity involvements I've seen in wrestling in a long time. If not, I was about to say if not ever, but I think there are a couple that are above it. But he really, really invested into it, so it's led to this topic. I'll start us off with one of the celebrity involvements that comes to my mind, and that is from a few years back, where the Big Show would have a match with Floyd Mayweather at WrestleMania. It was, I think I must have been early teens when this went down, but it was just a really cool involvement, if you want, of a celebrity or a boxer at the height of their profession getting involved in WWE, which is something you don't see a lot of. WWE sort of get on the bandwagon a bit too late quite often, but Floyd was at the top of his game, and he played his role, which I guess is his personality in real life of arrogant little prick, very well, and it sort of gave you the impression that Big Show actually wanted to kill him. I think at a pay-per-view leading into WrestleMania, Floyd would punch Big Show in the face and break his nose, And I just remember Big Show, the look on Big Show's face, it was sort of animalistic, like he wanted to just grab someone and rip them apart. I remember all of his entourage just running out of the ring and Big Show chasing them down.
I kind of remember some of the build about it because it was around the time Big Show had started using the knockout punch kind of finishing move.
Floyd would end up winning by hitting Big Show with brass knucks, I believe.
That does sound
in the
familiar.
head and knocking him out. Yeah, well, it's certainly better than the other celebrity involvement that Big Show had at WrestleMania.
Ooh.
If you remember that.
Yeah, that's
The sumo match that he had.
yeah, I do actually remember watching that one. That was
That was wacky. That was very wacky. And the sight of Big Show's butt cheeks still burns bright in my head. But let's move on from that anyway and go on to one of your celebrity involvements in wrestling.
yeah. One of the ones that I really liked was I believe it was a tag match between Stardust, or now known as once again as Cody Rhodes, and King Barrett. I think that was the persona he was playing at the time, facing off against Neville, and the celebrity involvement was from Stephen Amell. He had a segment where he was in the crowd, and then eventually it followed it up with a match. And I really liked it because it was a celebrity who is a wrestling fan, and he actually put the effort in to wrestle. A lot of times when you have a celebrity segment, they're there, they'll hit a bad clothesline or something, and they'll get a roll-up win. They normally get like one or two moves. They might do a splash or something, but they'll do something. And then they'll get a win. And there's not a lot of involvement. But Stephen Amell put in a lot of effort to actually get involved. He wanted to wrestle, but also quite humorously he looked quite small, and he's not a small guy. Like you watch him.
No, it just shows you how big the wrestlers are.
Yeah, you watch him on TV, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's there's loads of pictures from his days in Arrow. He used to have a lot of shirtless moments to attract the women to watch the TV shows, and he was in really good shape. And then there's just like him stood next to Neville, who he was a cruiserweight. He's not one of the big guys in WWE, but yeah, it was a good match. I believe the faces won, as they normally do with a celebrity involvement. But yeah, I really liked that as a segment, and that actually stood out to me as like a celebrity actually putting in some effort.
Like you say, it's just one of those refreshing moments where the celebrity actually gets involved with the wrestling and is invested, and you can tell. And yeah, it was good stuff. I want to go over to not an actual match, but it was a moment. It was 2015 actually. I was there in the Manchester Arena where Wayne Rooney would get involved with the wrestling. He would eventually end up slapping Wade Barrett around the chops after Wade, I think he sort of called him out. It was during the peak of the League of Nations with Sheamus, Wade Barrett, Miro, or Rusev as he was then, and was it Alberto Del Rio? But anyway, Wade Barrett would call out Wayne Rooney at the side of the ring. He'd go down, get in his face, and Wayne Rooney would really badly punch Wade Barrett in the face.
Wayne Rooney punched Wayne Rooney.
It's just one that sticks. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Wayne Rooney did punch Wayne Rooney. That's probably the level of IQ that bloke has. He was a good footballer, but it doesn't strike me as the most intelligent footballer, or people, if you want, just people in the world.
I didn't actually see this at the time. This was during my university days where I had a lot less time to watch wrestling, and I didn't have.
Where Damien discovered women, drugs, and alcohol.
I didn't have access to Sky Sports when I was at university, so I wasn't able to watch like the weekly shows. I did catch most of the pay-per-views still, but this was definitely a time that my wrestling knowledge lacks a bit. Well, I believe this was because of a video that leaked of Wayne Rooney getting knocked out around the same time.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
I can't remember.
And he ended up doing it in a celebration as well.
Yeah, there was a whole thing going on around that time. I can't remember what happened, but a video leaked of Wayne Rooney boxing in his kitchen with someone.
he was like, play fighting in his kitchen. He actually caught a right hand into the chin and got knocked out.
And then that led to this kind of moment.
But do you have a last celebrity involvement that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one that sticks out to me when you talk about celebrity involvement, and all of the other ones we've talked about so far, they stick in mind for wrestlers who kind of know, not wrestlers that kind of celebrities that kind of know what's going on and getting involved. Like even Wayne Rooney, you kind of get the impression that someone was like, "Oh, do you want to go to wrestling thing?" It's like, yeah, okay. Like he knew. I'm not going to do a Wayne Rooney impression, but you kind of get the impression that they know what's going on and they've been talked through everything and they're going to do a segment. But what I want to talk about is a time that completely didn't happen. And this was a segment from, I believe this was during the whole. I thought it was during the whole special guest host segments on Raw, but it was actually before that. This was a 2006 episode of Raw when two of the stars from Jackass appeared, and it was to promote the movie. I don't know if it was the first one, the second one. I'm not really exactly an expert on when the Jackass movies come out, but the two stars, one of them was Steve-O and Chris Pontius. Now, okay. They were supposed to come out to the ring, promote their movie, and get beaten down by Umaga. And unfortunately, he is quite well known. Steve-O has a history of drug problems and things like that. And at the time, he was high on something. He's spoken about this himself. He does have some funny things to say about it. So if you haven't ever seen it, I would recommend searching out for him and Chris Pontius reviewing this. But I'll give you a brief version of what happens. Is Steve-O doesn't know that he needs to stay down, so he gets hit and he's meant to stay down, and he gets back to his feet and like celebrates with the crowd and everyone's like cheering him. But that does not make Umaga look very good because he's meant to be like this monster heel. So he does another move on him, and Steve-O just keeps rolling around on the floor. He doesn't play quote dead. Like that's kind of what you're meant to do in wrestling. Is when you get knocked down, you stay down. But because Steve-O is on something, he doesn't remember this, and he just keeps getting back up and moving. So Umaga just starts doing moves to him for real, and you can see the look on Steve-O's face of absolute terror as he hits these moves on him. And I don't remember seeing this live, but I've seen it on various things over the years, including the review by Steve-O himself, and it just kind of sticks out as a lesson, really, of like you kind of, if you step into a wrestling ring, you kind of need to respect what's happening in the world of wrestling, and you need to be prepared. And if you're not, but like, it's gonna hurt. Like Steve-O is a great example.
Go. I think that's the podcast. On that note,
yeah, I think
we've pretty much summed everything up from this week in the WWE and a little sprinkle of AEW.
Yeah. Hopefully, as time goes on, we can start covering a bit more of AEW. But it's still early days for this podcast, and we're still trying to figure out how to do everything. And 5 hours of wrestling a week is quite a lot to cover. So
it certainly is. It certainly is. I'm only watching AEW because I am on furlough and I've got nothing better to do. Damien is actually in a full-time job, which is a concept that I don't even remember what it is, to be honest. At this stage. What is work? I haven't worked since November.
Oh wow, that's a long time.
The beginning of November, it's nuts. This is the 5th month.
Well, we've had news here in the UK that hopefully in a few months we'll be back to normal. Let's not hold our breath, but fingers crossed there is a light at the end of the tunnel for the weirdness that has been 2020 and 2021.
Fingers crossed. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, everyone. And as always, If you're a repeat listener, thank you for coming back. If you're a new listener, I hope you come back, and we'll see you soon.
For more content from us, you can check out our punishment videos, or should I say my punishment videos, over on YouTube by searching the Figure Fourcast. You can follow us on Twitter for additional thoughts we have during the week on Twitter at Figure 4 UK, and we also have a Facebook group where we'll post links to anything we post, which you can find by searching the Figure Fourcast. But we look forward to recording the next episode for you.